Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome back to part 2 of this motion tutorial in which we're going to be looking at finishing off this fiery planet scene. Now in part 1 we did a lot of preparatory work of preparing the elements, and now comes the fun part of putting it all together. If you didn't want to work all the way through part 1, I'm going to be publishing a link where you can download all the pre-rendered elements and effectively skip forward straight to part 2. And you'll have this basic scene already in that package, so you can start at precisely this point. Okay, so first of all I want to set up some glows around the planet, both inside and outside. So if you remember, we made a 3D group for the planet and put it inside that. So I'm going to make a new group just above that planet, Command-Shift-N, and I'm going to hit Control-D to toggle it to 2D. I'm going to hit F7 to call up the heads-up display. Then I'm going to come down and select the circle shape and select a fill color. I'm going to pick sort of nice bright, maybe make it a little bit brighter, something like that. Then I'm going to hold down the Shift key as I draw out my circle, and I want it roughly the same size as my planet itself. Close down the HUD and come to the shape properties and use the reset button to center it up. And I'm going to call this tight. And I'm going to call that group outer glow. Now I'm going to take this tight shape, come to the library, filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and add a Gaussian blur to that. I'll come to the inspector and I'll set the Gaussian blur amount to 150. And you can see that's just moved the edge of that out beyond the edge of the planet. So let's take this group and use Command /bracket to move it below the planet group. And now you can see we've got a glow happening on the outside. Let's set its blend mode, of the shape. Let's set the blend mode to add. And let's duplicate it. And we'll call it medium. And I'll put it below the tight again, using Command /bracket. We'll come to its Gaussian blur amount, and this time we'll set the amount to 300. And we might just also increase the scale of this just a little bit. There, 105. Then we'll duplicate that one more time, Command-D, and call it large. Move it behind again, Command /bracket. Come to the Gaussian blur, and let's set that to 600. And we'll possibly increase that scale to 110. And what we might just do is come to the color and shift it around a bit more towards red, I think. And possibly the same with this medium color, a little bit more towards red. There we go. We can always adjust this later on. Next we want to make the inner glow, so let's come to the planet group and above it make a new group. Command-Shift-N, Control-D to toggle it off 3D. We're going to call this tight inner. We'll make a new group, Command-Shift-N, toggle it off 3D, and call it inner glow, and move tight inner into that group. Then we'll come back to our circle shape tool, and holding down the Shift key, we will drag out a shape, hopefully the same size as the planet again, and use the reset key to center it up. Now we need to be quite precise about this, get it just right in terms of its size. So I'm going to scale it down till it's just right in relation to the planet. So I think at 99.5 is going to be about it. There we go. And then I'm going to call that tight, just keep it tidy, and duplicate it, Command D, and I'm going to call it matte, and I'll set its color to white. And then I will take my tight inner group, make a mask for it, Command Shift M, and I'll use that matte and drag it into the mask source well, and set the mask blend mode to subtract. I'll come to the library, Gaussian blur, and add it to the image mask. So I want to set the blur value to about 20, and then what I'll do is I'll come to the matte and then just scale it down till I start to get an edge, something like that. Probably increase the blur amount on the mask just to soften that off more, something like that. And I want to make sure that the blend mode for this tight inner group is set to add. That's good. And then basically what we'll do the same as we did with the outer glow. I'm going to duplicate tight inner, call it medium. I'm going to come to its, move it to the bottom, I should say, Command / bracket, come to its matte, and increase the scale, and then adjust the Gaussian blur, like so, somewhere around there. I'm rushing through this because otherwise we could take all day. You get the idea. Command D to duplicate that, call it large, put it behind, increase the matte size, or decrease the matte size I should say, to about there, and increase the blur all the way up to 600. Okay, so that's all a bit extreme. There were two ways we could do this. We could adjust the large color. I'll probably do that. Bring it over towards red a bit more. And let's reduce its opacity down to about 50%. Same thing with the medium. Push that color a little bit more towards red. And reduce the fill opacity down to about 50%. And that's not looking too bad. We probably want to take that tight inner and just brighten up that fill color. So bring it down to center till we're virtually white, something like that. So we get a nice bright edge. Okay, and now we can close up that inner glow group. Turn on the outer glow group, hit F8 to see it full screen, Shift Z, and you can see we've got a pretty decent glow. And obviously we can adjust those values very interactively if we want to refine the scene later on. And let's move on to the stage of adding in the corona. Okay, so I'm going to make a new group above outer glow and hit Command Shift N, Control D to make it 2D, and we're going to call this Corona. And we're going to come to our file browser, and that, if you remember, we made a nice folder called Tutorial Textures, and there were 3 rendered elements. We had small flower, main flower, and flares, and so let's import those 3 and bring them in like that. First of all, we need to set their blend mode to screen, So let's isolate the main fire first of all. Move it to the bottom, Command square bracket, and I'm going to increase its size to about 148, 149, somewhere like that. I also just want to colorize that group so we're looking at the right kind of thing. So let's come to Library, Filters, Color Correction, Levels, and apply it to the Corona group. That's obviously changed its blend mode, so let's set that back to screen. And we're going to come to the Levels properties, and we turn up in the histogram. First of all, we'll set the red white in to 0.7 and the green white in to 0.7, and we'll just decrease the gamma of the blue to 0.65, just as a starting point. Obviously we can come back and refine that at another time. Okay, so let's come back to our main fire, and I want to improve the look of it, and what we're going to do is we're going to come to distortion, and if you remember, very partial to the underwater filter, so I'm going to drag it to that main fire. You know what I'm going to also do is I'm going to come to my library, favorites, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that underwater into the favorites so I don't have to keep hunting for it when we want to retrieve it. In actual fact, what I probably should have done is adjusted my parameters first to get something more that I like. So I'm going to set the size to 0.2, the speed to 0.1, and the refraction to 25. You can see what that's done to those flames. It's just made them much more curly and flame-like. It's great use for the underwater filter. So come back to the library, let's delete that, move that to trash, and drag the new one into there. And we could also, if we wanted, we could rename it Underwater Fiery Planet. So next, I'd like to clone this main fire layer, just to add a bit more complexity. So K to clone it. And what we'll do is come to the inspector, and we're going to rotate that clone through 55 degrees. And if I turn that on and off, you can just see we've built up a little more flame detail there. Next I'm going to turn on my small fire, and again I'm going to increase its scale. Let's go for 155. There we go, turn that on and off so we can see it's just providing me a very little edge there. Maybe I'll change its blend mode to add, or maybe even linear dodge. Linear dodge gives me a really nice hot effect. I think I quite like that. So I'll come to my library, and I'm going to drag on my underwater fiery planet onto the small fire, and I think we can happily stick with those defaults. So that's the advantage of saving it to the library. If you've got something that works for a particular project, great idea to just save it into favorites. Okay, so the next step is to deal with the flares, which if you remember from part 1, if I solo this layer, alt-clicking on that button to solo it, is this quite strange looking affair with the individual flares shooting up. Now what I want to do about this is I think I just want to isolate just this individual one here. So I'm going to come to the Bezier mask, and I'm just going to draw around where it all happens like that, just so we've now got just that one flare which comes up and simmers around and sort of does a second burst at around 6 seconds. So let's unsolo that, or rather unsolo everything. That's Control-Shift-S. And we've got this flare back. Let's turn on that flare layer. And I want to do something a little bit different with the scaling this time. Turn the overall scale up to 166, but I want to turn the X scale down to 125. And I also just want to reduce the opacity, I think, to 75%. So we need 5 instances of this flares element, each one offset in time. And I'm going to make a new group, Command-Shift-N, to hold all the flares. And I'm going to drag that one into the enclosing group. And then I'm going to duplicate it, Command-D. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this bar down here and just slide it back in time. Roughly a couple of seconds maybe. And that way we've got the 2 elements offset. So now I'm going to turn on the overlays and I'm just going to rotate it till it comes to about here probably. That's looking quite good. I'm going to duplicate it again. Again, I'm going to drag it backwards in time, so about 4 seconds. You can see the numbers updating there to show how far you've moved. And then let's rotate it down to maybe about there. And possibly use the scale just to scale it in a bit, just so it's a little bit different. We could also flop these, or if we wanted to get really clever. Let's duplicate it again. Again, let's drag it to the left. And let's rotate it some more. That could maybe go down to about here. Let's duplicate it one more time. Drag it back further. And then we'll just rotate it around even more. Let's have it about there, where it lines up quite nicely with a flare that's coming out already. Okay, so that's my 5 flares done. The next step I want to show you is creating some bright fissures or cracks in the surface of the planet. So it's like lava is breaking out in specific places. So in order to do that, we are going to make one more new element. Right, so I've got another new project. I remembered to save my old one, of course, my planet build. And let's come to Command J to see the project properties. Let's set the width to 1280 and the height to 1280. So 1280 square, frame rate is 24 frames a second, and we just need 5 seconds in duration. We're going to come to the library, generators, and we're going to add the star generator. Apply that. Let's come to its inspector properties. What I want to do is animate the radius. So I'm going to come to frame 12. So frame 12, type it in, and I'm going to set a keyframe for the radius. And I'm going to leave that at 19. I'm going to come to the start of the project, bring that down to 0, come to the end of the project, also bring that down to 0. So that's just animating up and down. So next I'm going to hit Command D to make a copy of that. Let's also come to frame 12 so we can just see what's happening. What I'm going to do with this one is set that radius to 44 at that keyframe position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the spike angle to 25 so we get this crossover effect. And then I want to add a circle, so I'm going to come to the shape and I'm going to draw a circle in the middle like that. Come to its properties, reset it, and let's make that a little bit more white. It doesn't have to be completely white. Okay, and let's actually make a third copy of that star. Sorry, forgot to do that. And this time we're going to set its radius to 32 at the 12 frame point. And we are going to set its angle to -15. So we've got this rather crazy looking shape there. What we're going to do is we're going to add... Actually, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to come to our favorites, and we're going to use our underwater filter and drag it to the top group. Come to the inspector. So I'm just going to set the scale to 2, and the refraction I'm going to set to 200. Like that. Then I'm going to duplicate it. Command D. And I'm going to come to the library and filters. I'm going to come down to stylize, and I'm going to add the crystallize filter above those two. Come to the inspector, and the value I want a size of 10, I think, and set the speed to 0. And now if I play that, I get a slightly crazy effect. What I've forgotten to do, of course, is I've forgotten to animate my circle size. So let's come to its properties, frame 12, set a scale keyframe of 100 there, come to the start, set it to 0, come to the end, also set it to 0. Now if we play, we've got this crazy swirling animated effect. And I think what I want to do is I want to just adjust the colour of that circle so it matches in a bit better. Let's just pick, let's just go for white. A little bit of yellow in maybe. Right, we're going to save that project as Hotspots, and then we are going to render it out. Command E, and come to our fiery planet, and we've got tutorial textures, and we're going to render it out as Hotspot 01. In actual fact, I'm just going to make one of these for now. You could actually, if you really wanted to get fancy, you could just adjust some of those underwater properties, as you probably understood by now, change the refraction or whatever. But I think, given what we're going to be doing with it, I think one is probably enough. Okay, so let's close that up and come back to our original planet build project. So what I want to do is I want to put these new hotspot effects into the master planet group. So I'm going to come inside that and hit Command-Shift-N, and I'm going to call this group Hotspots. Come to the file browser, and that Hotspots 01 I'm going to drag into that group. Let's come back to frame 12 so we can see what's happening. Come to the inspector, and let's set the blend mode to linear dodge. Let's set the scale to 30, and then what I want to do is I need to move affect its position. So I'm going to turn on the overlays, and now this is like quite a strange sort of game, because I want to try and line it up with one of these. That's brighter part there. So what I have to do is I have to move slightly counterintuitively because of the twirl effect that we've got in there. So there we are. You see my center is not the same as the center of the effect, but it's quite fun once you get going, and it's not that hard to do. What we actually need to do with this, of course, is to stylize it up again. We're going to come to the library favorites, and we're going to drag on my favorite underwater fiery planet filter. Come to the inspector. We'll set the size, in this instance, to 1, the speed down to 0, and the refraction to 200. And as you can see again, if I zoom in, that does a really great job of making that look even more organic. You know, we can really refine where that happens if we zoom in. So what we're going to do is we're going to add about 12 of these in all, maybe more. It really depends on how patient you can be. Let's just do 1 just to show you what I mean. First of all, I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to play the strange game of trying to match it up to a shape on the planet. And then I'm just going to change its timing. There. Dragging it along so they're not happening at the same time. What we could also do is we could rotate it, just really so we're getting something that looks like it fits into that hole. So maybe scale it down a bit. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Just basically find a nice hotspot that you'd like to amplify. Don't have them all happening at the same time, so just shift them along each time, and just build up as much complexity as you want. It's pretty easy and quite fun. So well, let's come back once that's all been built. Okay, so we're back, and here's a RAM preview of how that looks. I'm sure with a bit more effort you could probably make something even nicer than that, but hopefully that's given you enough of an idea of how that technique would work. That's pretty much the project done. I've been using a default camera in here just to obviously enable us to see the planet at the correct size. I've also set up an animated camera that zooms back out. And in order to finish off the project, I'm going to drag in some other backgrounds elements that I've created before. Obviously this tutorial's become much too long for me to show you how all those were made. If you really wanted to know how they were done, for example, I've got a plasma cloud here, I've got nebula type things, I've got planets, I've got a starfield, animated starfield. If you really want to know about those, do drop me a line and I'll see about creating an additional tutorial in which we can look at how that all works. Okay, and just one final thing that I forgot to do earlier on, and that's to add my underwater filter to these flares. So come to my library favorites, and I'll just drag that onto the master flares group, and just need to ensure that that group is set to screen because that changes the blend mode. Okay, sorry about that. One final thing that I want to point out is that in this background we've got graduations of colour going off from bright to dark, which typically will give you problems of banding when it's compressed for the web and so forth. So in order to avoid that, we're going to come to the library, generators, and we're going to add a noise generator right at the top of everything else. Let's turn that group to 2D to make it fill the screen. Let's come to the properties, set the blend mode for the noise layer to overlay, and the opacity down to 5. And now this needs to animate. So we come to the random seed, right click, add parameter behavior, rate, and then we can type really any value into there, 10 for example, and that will animate the noise. That'll sort out any banding issues. If you're still getting banding issues, if you render out and you do get banding issues, just increase that opacity value. But here's the finished render. Thanks very much for your patience in sticking with this project. I hope you've seen the benefit of pre-rendering elements. It makes the whole business of compositing much easier and more interactive than trying to build everything into the one project. Okay, thanks very much indeed for watching. Hope to see you again next time.